Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Sermon Prep Podcast. I'm Dan Metzger. I'm the pastor at St. Mark's United Methodist Church here in Findlay, Ohio. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about words and the power of our words. We're going through this series on the book of James. And James has a lot to say. About 20% of the book of James is about how we use our words. And so I was thinking about in my life who is one of the people that maybe might have the most to say about the power of our words and how we use language. And that's a friend of mine. His name is Chip Mahaney. Chip has a 45-year career in journalism. He's worked as a sports and news producer, executive producer. He's been a local news director, which is like the TV equivalent of a newspaper editor in chief. He's been a corporate executive, a recruiter. He right now is at SMU, Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and he is their media executive in residence and is a professor of journalism. He's also done some really fun stuff with the Scripps National Spelling Bee, which I always love to talk with him about because I think that's so interesting. But he is calling in from Dallas, and Chip, thanks for being here today.
Hey, Dan, thanks for inviting me. It's great to hear from you personally, and I look forward to diving into this material.
Excellent. And also, Chip, so we met, man, I was trying to think of how many years ago it was now. It was probably about 15 years ago or so down in the Cincinnati area when I was pastoring down there and you were living there. And we got to know each other a little bit there. And yeah, just always really appreciated and admired the work that you do. And I know that you've got a lot to say about journalism, but you also did a paper during COVID through Kent State University on James the Just.
You know what? I had to do a paper on one of 50 topics that the professor gave us. The class was called Ancient Christianities. And so it dealt with a lot of the culture of the time and the different figures of the time and the immediate, half a century after Jesus. And I had never really studied James at any level. And I thought, well, he'd be really interesting, brother of Jesus, and then going into his background. It was a 13-page paper. So not like I'm talking about a dissertation. It's not a book. But it was really good study around, who was he and who do other people think he is? Because, there is some uncertainty about, again, which of the Jameses he was. Was he James, the brother of Jesus? And that's where the primary scholarship goes. But there were other Jameses mentioned. And so, so that's that is it was a fun topic to study and to learn. And then you put in some of the things that are attributed to him in his book, his epistle in the New Testament, as well as other writings about him, not just from biblical writers, but also from those in the culture then or later on.
Yeah, I read your paper. I told you I didn't find anything blatantly heretical, so I'm pretty excited to hear what it is that you have to say about this. But I thought we'd start off just kind of talking about you've been in journalism for a while now. I think it said 45 years in journalism. How have you seen the way that we speak with each other evolve over that time? I feel like language changes all the time and the ways in which we speak evolve, but like how we talk to each other, how have you seen that change?
I'll give you a very specific example from my business. And actually came up, I was at a broadcasters convention in Lincoln, Nebraska yesterday. So talking with people in my business, I did a presentation around resilience and mental health in tough times. And it was a really good talk. But one of my friends who was also there teaching on another topic, AI in particular, he's a reporter and an anchor. And one of the things that always has been the case in television world is that we have these big television voices. And when television was the primary way that people got their news, newspapers were there, but if you wanted something live, it was television. Often your local television anchors were among your community's biggest celebrities. That the anchor voice, came about. And everyone wanted to be Walter Cronkite, or if you were in the 60s, 70s, early 80s, or, people have come since then. And so much now in our world is has to go away from that because local television doesn't have the influence it used to Many people don't even watch local television anymore because they're streaming everything. There's the students I meet with at SMU, just like any college students coming in this year. They were turning 13 in the pandemic, um, and they were in the pandemic is when all streaming really took off. And so if you were 13 or 12 going into the pandemic, you probably don't have much of a connection with a favorite show of any type on CBS, NBC, ABC, or Fox. All of your favorite shows have been in the streaming era. And so they don't have a connection with local TV. And even their parents, people are in their 40 to 55 for these people's parents. They quit watching local TV at a point. So really the people who at our age group who only understand local TV are those who grew up with grandparents, and the grandparents still have a deep connection to local TV. All right, what does that mean? Well, we were just kind of kidding ourselves with our group of students, our people in our room that were adults as well. Talking about the anchor voice really has to go away, because in the world today where trust is very low among any institutions, including journalism, then we have to be as authentic and as real as we can. And the best we can do for our business and for our reputations and for our industry and for our communities is to get rid of the anchor voice and just start talking like real people. The thing about the generations too, and again, I work now with 19 to 22-year-olds primarily. And I just fun to listen to in class when they, come up with a phrase that I've not heard of before. I've got a lot of athletes in my classes who come from very different backgrounds, and I can't even make out some of what they're saying, which is scary in some ways, but also fun to try to decipher what it is they're trying to talk to each other about. So there is a lot of change. There's a lot of change going on, and some of it's kind of enforced by my culture and the business I've been in. But some of it is, obviously a lot of it is the culture we live in, and the words we choose impacted a lot by pop culture, by music, by entertainment, by social media. The trends in language are part of trends that emerge on social media. So much of what we say today and how we communicate is just developed either organically, well, typically organically, by some random person in some corner of the internet, but just got something out there that became viral, and that created all new language. Phrases or words that are new that come entire, paragraphs or more beyond that in terms of how we speak.
I think it's such a interesting thing. I love kind of going back. I mean, the Bible is actually a great example of how language changes over time. We have new translations that are coming out all the time because language changes, language evolves. I mean, we don't speak like the King James language anymore. And before that, it was something else. And before that, it was something else. I mean, our language, just the way that we talk, the words that we use, we know that all of that evolves. And I think you are right that social media and things that go viral, whatever it might be, all of these different places where new phrases show up and emerge, or just ways of speaking emerge now, because we all have access to this. It does almost feel like we're getting like this global, I almost want to say like a global accent, where we all, our language is heard all around the world. The way that we talk is heard all around the world, and just the way that we speak to each other. It seems like it's all kind of meshing together in some ways.
It certainly creates cohesion among people who are kind of in that group, which if you're on, most people are on social media of some sort. And it certainly creates acceleration and speed where things can just pop and then be big within a matter of days, where it used to take a generation sometimes, or it was very colloquial. What we talked about in Ohio would have been very different about what we talk about things in Texas. So that's not longer the case. I mean, and soon our dialects, I think over another generation or so, given the way that social media works and the way, there'll be much less of kind of regional dialects and much more of kind of a national dialect, because what is regional anymore? I mean, your social media people are just as close to you as your own parents. They're just on a screen, but you're hearing them more than you're hearing your parents. And so those local dialects, I worry we'll lose those. Good thing we have all these recordings and people can still practice them, but they won't be mainstream anymore.
Right.
The people from Wisconsin versus the people from, somewhere down in Alabama,
right.
So that may be a kind of a victim of this kind of mass assimilation into the language we all share.
I think one thing that'll never fully assimilate across these cultures is what we consider chili to be. I mean, your Texas chili versus Ohio chili, and then Cincinnati chili. It's a whole thing. Um, and I don't know if we have time to go down that rabbit trail or not.
I'll give you that one sentence here. I'm a Skyline fan. I just don't call it chili. It's a soup. If you call it Skyline, I'm perfectly good with that. But because chili in Texas is a very different thing,
Oh,
we're very proud of
absolutely.
it.
Well,
So I like
even
Skyline.
in northern Ohio, I mean, the skyline, that's a condiment. It's a condiment for things. That is not a chili. So, but we're talking about words. Okay. So you mentioned social media, and you mentioned AI a little bit, that you were at a conference about that. Do you think with the rise of things like large language models, ChatGPT, all this stuff, that the role of social media, all this stuff, do our words still have the same power as they used to? James talks about just the power of the tongue, and how much our words mean. Do you think that's still the case today?
I heard something interesting yesterday from my friend at this conference who talked about, AI has now gotten so good that even if you misspeak when you type into it or talk into it, it knows what you're saying. You can give it a whole different verb, and because you just mistype something, and it knows exactly because it can read the context, right? So, there's advancements in that that are happening every day. I want to point to a different side of this with regard to how we learn and how we take in information, and that's driven all by video now. I just taught a media literacy and democracy class this summer, and 18 students at SMU, 10 were athletes. It's a kind of a starter class to get people involved in understanding the media around them. The goal of the class is to make them better, more media literate, like you might take a financial literacy class so that you can manage your money better as an adult, right? This is how you manage your information better. And so it's a very useful class. And one of the things I taught them at the very beginning is a concept called the Gutenberg parenthesis or parentheses. And it's a theory. You can find it online. There's a great book by a noted journalist and scholar named Jeff Jarvis, who's written all about this, but he didn't come up with the concept. The concept has been out there for a few years. And the notion is before Gutenberg. So Gutenberg gave us the printing press. He gave us the written word at mass scale. Now everyone could read. Back then it was only the elite and often the priest who could read. Then it became everyone could read over a period of centuries, so that reading was now the foundational way we shared information. Reading could be stored, books could be made and kept for hundreds of years. We never lost information anymore. We gave up, however, the lore, the folklore, the stories that changed over time. And of course, the Bible is a big part of that. Those stories were handed down. They weren't written on parchment or paper. Now what we're getting to now is the other end of the parenthesis. And that parenthesis is coming with the emergence of video and social media. And the fear for some, and the reality I think is happening, is that the more we rely on video, the less we read. And where before we had Gutenberg in the printing press, dialects, you might have had different entire languages 10 miles away, because if they couldn't connect each other for commerce, there was no reason or no way for them to communicate. So they might have had a very different way of speaking and called things differently. And it wasn't until the Gutenberg printing press came around that languages became standard. And Martin Luther, wanting to get the Bible into a local language was a big part of that as well. Christianity had a massive influence on the spread of the language. So these days, however, with everything, so much of our information consumption comes through video. And the young people of today, not that they can't read, but they don't read. And that will lead, we think, or at least what the hypothesis is of this notion called the Gutenberg parenthesis, is that we will go back to tribal languages again that will be in our social communities. They won't be geographical. They won't be hyper-local. They'll be around the world. They'll be by interest or by commonality in terms of, how we feel about ourselves or how we present or the things we're interested in. That the written standardized word, and that, by the way, spelling is a big part of all that standardization, right? That written standardized word that became the foundation of our learning for 600 years will drift back into a whole different set of learnings based on tribes again. and those tribes will be very, very different. And the way that the standardizations we have right now in spelling, for instance, might not matter so much anymore.
Sure. That's that's such a fascinating thought. Like this idea of like you're talking about like a closed parenthesis to
Correct.
the written word. Like it had its time, and is its time kind of coming to an end
It's
where there's
the,
a whole different media? Yeah.
yeah, the age of print is the inside the parenthesis, and if we are at the end of the parenthesis, we are exiting the age of print, and now going into communications off of all different other kinds of media.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so, like, it makes me think about like what's the role of the church in this? I mean, we call ourselves people of the book, right? I mean, we are the Bible is our thing. It is print, and so what is yeah? Where does the church fit in all of this, and how do we adapt with the time? I mean, when the time of the printed word came out, that's the Bible was the beginning of all of that. It was the beginning of that parentheses, right? That's Gutenberg. And
I
so
mean, I would like to.
where do you see us now?
Yeah, I would like to think that Martin Luther was Gutenberg's first customer, right? In that sense, right? And I grew up in a Lutheran church, so I have some Luther favoritism there. But right? I mean, what's going to happen to our language if the written word is no longer valued and prized, esteemed, and held as the sanctity, the official source of things, right?
Mhm.
Um, because video is permeable, video can change, AI can change all of that as well. I have a Bible in front of me. I've got textbooks near me. I've got files over here. They're all printed, and what's on that paper is never going to change. I
Yeah.
can cross it out, I can cut it out, but I can't change what's on the paper. And now we're going to go back into a world where information is completely relative,
Hmm.
and AI can change it on the fly. So what was there 5 seconds ago won't even be there now. So, it's just, I think we're really moving into a world I won't, I mean, it'll create confusion in lots of places, but I think the lack of standardization will be the one thing that will be a notable effect if this trend in AI is certainly not going to go away, and it's going to get bigger, smarter, richer, and more powerful. And we're going to go along with it. But the notion of how people communicate today, like I said, some of these members of the athletes in my class, really talk a whole different language.
Hmm.
It's not a language they read. It's just a language that in their communities, that's how they speak.
Hmm.
Very different from the language that you and I are speaking here today.
That's fascinating. So I want to kind of drill down into a little bit about what this means for us as Christians and as people who are seeking to be faithful in the way that we use our words. And one of the things you do as help teach journalism and have worked in the industry for a long time. One of our main scriptures this week is we're going to be talking about being quick to listen and slow to speak, and that's a which comes right out of the first chapter of James. And it feels like that might be a good lesson for an aspiring journalist. We, in a world that's just putting content out all the time, um, maybe the art of listening is going away a little bit, but I think that's maybe a part of what could give our words a little bit more weight and a little more importance is if we're actually hearing someone else and being able to say something out of that comes from being good at listening to another person. Is that something that you guys talk about in journalism very often, like the art of listening and being quick to listen?
Yeah, I mean it's imperative, right? And the old saying is, you never learn a thing while your mouth is open, right? So if you want to learn, and our job as journalists is often not to repeat what we already know. It's because news is new. You have to go learn the thing that you're going to report on that night. And many journalists are what we would call general assignment. Your local news reporters, almost all of them are general assignment, which means they're going to go cover the story that's in front of them that day. That is news. And so good journalists become very good about learning a few things about a lot of topics over a period of a year or two or longer, right? You can always talk about something because you probably covered it at some point. And so, but you don't learn anything. None of us are reading that. Often you're getting your information from interviews or maybe from a press release, but oftentimes it's coming from somebody's original source, which is out of their mouth. And so, and one of the great, if you ever watch an interviewer, a 60 Minutes interview or somebody like that who can really get to the bottom of a subject, then, the listening part is absolutely critical. You come in with a list of questions, but one of the joys of interviewing is also one of the key parts of interviewing is that you really have to let your ears do most of the work, and know when to follow up with a new question rather than just move the next question on your list. And so, the art of listening, the art of being in the moment with what that other person's saying, the more you do that, I guarantee you the better of a story you're going to come up with, because the more deeply you're going to get in your answers. This is equivalent to something I've always talked about in a disciple class that I've taught. I've taught disciple for 15 years. Haven't done it in a while, but love doing that. And I'll always tell the class in the first week of disciple Bible studies, like, I'm going to let the silence do its job, which means if I ask a question for the room, maybe 10 or 12 people in the room, I'm not going to sit there, wait 10 seconds, and then answer it myself. I'm going to let it hang out there for 20 or 30 seconds, and it will get really uncomfortable for some of you. But the silence has to do its work so that others can speak and others will think more deeply because they've had the time to process what they want to say.
Oh man. And I think that is such a great lesson, not just if you're teaching a class, but just in everyday conversation with people. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I find myself, I'm doing it right now, by the way, making sure I'm actively listening and not just um, thinking about what I get to say next, because I think that's oftentimes what we do. We only pause to listen to give ourselves a break before we get to talk again. And but yeah, letting the silence, letting the uh, really listening to what someone else has to say, uh, I think that's so important, uh, not just in a journalism way or in a teaching kind of way, but um, just as a just in a relationship kind of way. And that's a part of what we're supposed to do as followers of Christ. We're forming relationships with one another, real, authentic relationships. There is plenty. Another way of talking about this is content versus community. If Christianity was just about absorbing content and making sure that people are hearing the content that you need to just get out and just speak and that kind of thing, if it was that, we'd be, it's fine. That's easy. Anybody can just put out a bunch of content. But to really have community and relationship means that you're listening to one another. And I think that's a part of what Jesus calls us to, is to have those kinds of conversations, and those and the relationship aspect of all of that, I think is just and super vital in that we miss out on a lot. And it's been something that I think, especially since COVID, we've noticed a huge shift in that there is, and with the rise of AI, there's content galore now, and community is getting less, and so we have a harder time knowing how to listen to one another and communicate and be in community with one another.
And I have 2 points to say to that. One is, when we're so distracted by our devices, again, we find community all day long. It's just not near in our presence, right? It's always on and always distracting us, or sometimes it's doing us good. But the trouble in a church, which is often built around a local community, sometimes the local community gets the shorter shrift over the latest flashy thing that's on my phone today, the latest viral meme, the latest tweet. One of my friends and far away or nearby texted me, and that interrupts my train of thought with the person standing in front of me. On a business side, that also feeds into that. It's any kind of group dynamic. If you've taken any one of the Myers-Briggs type indicator tests or something else involving the 16 personalities, there's several online you can take for free, and the Myers-Briggs is one you pay for. But one of the scales that kind of helps you understand your personality preference is extrovert versus introvert. And extrovert is not just about talking, although that comes with it. Extrovert is how you process information. I'm a total extrovert. I like meetings. I like to decide things in a group where we can all share. But I'm also an extrovert that like to talk. And one thing you have to learn as an extrovert is to shut up, because the introverts won't speak at the same force and the same speed you will speak. They need the silence to process what they want to say. And often when the extroverts actually be quiet for that uncomfortable 20 or 30 seconds, then the introverts in one sentence will come up with the smartest thing that's been said in the last 10 minutes because they can process differently. They like to be in their mind, and their mind sometimes take a moment to kind of get exactly what they want to say, but it's perfect the first time. Whereas an extrovert like me, I'll waste 200 words to get to my point.
I do the same thing, which probably makes us good for recording a podcast because we just talk through our thoughts. So,
Right. That's how you process, right?
yeah,
And
absolutely.
how you process information. Extroverts process externally. Introverts want to be told something or read something, and they want to process it in their mind. They don't need other people to help them think through because they're far more core valued in a sense. That's not good or bad either way, but they're far more comfortable with their core.
Yeah.
Whereas an extrovert is far more comfortable being in the community of ideas in that moment and then dealing with that chaos sometimes when you're kind of trying to figure out, well, who's got this idea versus that idea. But they got to shut up and let the introverts do their job, which is often their minds are working much harder than ours to come up with a deeper thought that maybe none of us would have thought of.
That's so good. All right, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I kind of prompted you on some stuff we were going to talk about, but I want to skip ahead and think about James himself, the half brother of Jesus. Uh, what do you think, as he's writing this thing and he's talking about the power of speech and all of this stuff? I'm trying to imagine myself being the half brother of Jesus, what that must have been like. And everything that Jesus said mattered and was important, and people are writing it down, and all of the things that go along with it, quoting him forever and ever. And then you have James. I just wonder, what do you think he felt about the power of his own words?
So my very short and again graduate level paper, it's not a dissertation, not a book, talked about, well, what was James's relationship to Jesus when Jesus was a human being on earth? And the literature is that James's Jesus, his brothers were not believers perhaps until the resurrection. And so in that, now they might have been, there's some thought around they maybe have been hangers on or kind of traveled with them some, but the scripture says that they were not all believers. And the other notion about James, now it was a good 12 years, but James, according to the scholarship I've referred to and what the Bible I've got in front of me says, James was written very early in the New Testament. It may have been the earliest book written, uh, AD 45, so 12 years after, 12 to 15 years after the crucifixion. Um, and so he wasn't using perhaps other scriptures. Like he was actually coming at this from his own self. And by this point, he had likely become, if this is all the same person, the leader of the church at Jerusalem, succeeding Peter. So a very prominent place. And obviously by this point, the resurrection of Jesus became his own salvation and resurrection too, that he had been born again into the faith, even if he was a disbeliever at the very beginning, or at least while Jesus was doing his ministry. So there's a lot about James that kind of goes into all of this. And, you look at James in writing this very passionate sermon here about his words. And by the way, people will call it a contrast to what Paul writes in Romans, but James was like written before Romans. So he wasn't calling out Paul as a writer. There may have been discussions between the two of them in that era, and there certainly probably were. But what did James know? What were his influences at the time inside Jerusalem? What was going on in that community of believers inside still the center of the Jewish faith? So there's a lot I don't know, right? I mean, there's a lot I'm kind of trying to figure out loud. An extrovert is processing out loud, right? This is what I do. But that is all very curious to me about where did James come up with this. Now, if Paul in Romans, talks about salvation through faith, and then James counters that with, well, okay, faith without works is dead. then you have a pretty good contrast about how we understand, our responsibilities as Christians, our opportunities and responsibilities as Christians. Um, but James, just simply on the tongue, right? I mean, James is so smart about, how powerful the tongue is. And I'm just really curious about why that came to his mind and what the community was at the moment he was writing this, or what he had experienced in his lifetime around why he felt it was necessary to do this. But he certainly writes as powerful as anyone does in the Bible around the power of the spoken word.
I wonder if a part of his, you talk about the community around him. I wonder if a part of it might be the way in which they had always seen the church, and leaders within the church try to um, exercise their power or their authority. It's who gets to stand up and be the teacher, who gets to stand up at the steps, and everybody else is listening. And I wonder if there was kind of this jockeying for position in the early church a little bit of. Um, Almost kind of like there is today, where everybody's trying to create that viral moment. There's maybe this void that's happened because Jesus is now ascended into heaven, and the church is trying to figure out who they are and whose voice are they listening to now. And there's a lot of people who are probably trying to kind of assert a little bit of their position in the church and wanting to be heard. And so, James will end up talking later, and I think it's chapter 3 where he talks about teachers. Like, maybe not all of you should be teachers. Maybe some of you're going to be judged more harshly. Maybe some of you should take a back seat a little bit. So yeah, I wonder if there's just some things going on around there. And then also I wonder if just the whole dynamic of um his brother is given 3 years of incredible ministry, the Sermon on the Mount, all of these things. And now, who is James to say, and might I add just this? And may I also just add my 2 cents? That there has to be a little bit of kind of this dynamic of, do my words carry that same weight? And are my words always necessary?
But he also, again, through his writings, again, talks about, the appreciation of the words you do give, how they
Yeah,
are powerful, how they are special. And whoever's speaking should know of the influence that you're having when you have the opportunity to speak.
yeah,
And that, again, that conveys authority. And we don't know, again, we kind of have an idea about how the church was built. Acts tells us a lot, doesn't tell us everything. But how the church was built, how it was, obviously started in the Pentecost and those early days and early months, and then how it matured, and how it became its own institution. You figure by the time we get to AD 40 and the time that James might have been written, this is all still right before Paul began his voyages. So, the church was largely centered around Jerusalem. Um, and, there's just, again, yeah, I would imagine the community was active. It had now been 15 years since Christ was walking with his disciples and others on earth. There have been a lot recorded, but a lot yet that were people were still trying to understand, particularly those that they were able to convert. Those who are new to the faith, and they always have ideas as well. People who are new to the faith, who don't understand it, who don't have the scholarship that you have or the scholarship that I have in our different ways. And they're brand new, but they've grown up around either people of the faith or other faiths and have those influences in them as well. And that's, where the church, certainly the Jewish church, and the Christian church, we know that authority, there was authority, and so it wasn't just simply maybe like in that first moments of Pentecost and everyone's speaking different tongues, and that was not authority outside of the Holy Spirit. But now there's structural authority in the church by the time that this is written. And so, James might have been talking to the leaders, the authority leaders, or he might have been talking to people in general. But it's a powerful message for both.
yeah. We're running low on time, but I've got to ask this question because I think this is a really important one. Thinking about being um, thinking about the importance of our speech, and uh, James also says he doesn't just say be quick to listen, but also um, be slow to speak and slow to anger. And there's a lot of vitriol and sensationalism and the rage bait and all these things. How do you think for us today, as a person of the book today, as a follower of Jesus today, how do we? What is just a word that you have for us about how we use our language and use our words in our witness today to the world?
If I had to put this into one word, I'd say breathe. Like, take a breath, take a moment. Don't respond out of a rush. Don't respond out of the instant emotion that you feel when someone says, breathe. That breath, if you're doing it the right way, will give you a moment to think with Jesus as your filter, right? With the Bible and the scriptures as your filter. If you can find a way in that moment, no matter how you feel or how urgent you feel like you need to speak to address a situation, and maybe it's just simply a post on social media, and I fail at this all the time. Because I like to get my words in, and I think I'm right about everything. Um, and it's, even though it's my name out there, I don't post anything under anonymous name. People know it's me, and even if they don't know me, they know they can click on me and to find out who I am. And I don't mind that. I like living in public, but it's to take the breath, to pause, to check yourself, remember who you are as a child of God and as a Christian.
Yeah.
If you do that, I guarantee you better things will happen.
What's really
Um,
beautiful about that is that this idea of taking a breath. I love that. And that the word breath and the word for wind or spirit in the New Testament, talking about the Holy Spirit, it's like it's all related to one another. That maybe there's something in the Holy Spirit in taking that breath, in taking that pause, and letting the Holy Spirit direct your words a little bit and direct your thoughts and calm your heart. I think that's a beautiful word. That's great. All
I
right.
give I give you one story real quick
Sure.
because um, I, in my TV station life, I probably answered 15,000, if not 20,000 viewer emails. People calling in. Sometimes they're asking questions. Hey, what did you talk about this story? Can I get that phone number? I didn't find this. Why is so and so wearing that dress today? Or you got this story wrong, or I hate you guys because you're biased, or whatever. And sometimes the angry people, and I would, whenever I'd see an angry email, and I'd respond, I would not write back into the email. I would not be back. I'd not be in Outlook. I would not be in the web form if I was using a web interface. I would open up Notepad and I would write the email that I really wanted to send, and it would be clean, but it'd be ugly. And then I would, because it wasn't in the original format, it wasn't in the original tool, I would delete that email. And then after that moment of getting that out of me, I would write, "Dear Mrs. Johnson, I really appreciate you watching and taking time to write us today. Nice, 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 nice. Thank you very much. Have a great day," and be done with it. But I had to get it out.
Yeah.
I had to get it out. And knowing that there's a way, a kind of a way to let the valve release the pressure, uh, gave me some satisfaction on my end, but did not let that word come out of my mouth so someone else could hear it.
That's that's a good word and a good practice because you don't want to accidentally hit
No,
send after typing that email out. That's for sure.
that is your friend or a text editor on a Mac or whatever. It is your friend.
All right, I got to ask one last question, then I'll get you out of here. You spent a lot of time. This has nothing to do with anything else we've talked about. But you spent a lot of time at the National Spelling Bee, and I just wondered, do you have a favorite memory or a word that stuck with you that you now use?
Um, I worked for the EWS Scripps Company for 16 years, and 14 of those years, I missed one for graduation. I missed one last year because I was leaving the company. Now I work at SMU, but I came back this year. Great joy. Um, One of the joys about the spelling bee is you're around all these wonderful young human beings who have studied really hard to get where they are. And it's not so much the words for me, it's the impressions that these young people make. The ones who are at the best, the ones who are on stage at the end, who are fighting through 20 rounds to get two people knocked out, they are the most confident people. You can't cram for a spelling bee. It's like you can't cram for a marathon. You have to take it slow and steady and learn as you go. And those people never, I never see them studying in the halls of the spelling bee. It's the kids who come from a small town that never know they got lucky and won the spelling bee because no one else showed up, or because they're a small state and they don't really have a spelling culture there. They're the ones who are in the hallways like 24 hours a day studying. It's like, no, the good ones have figured this out. And it's how much you put in 6 months ago to get you to where you are today. And my favorite memory is really something I get to every year. And so there's a guy who is the public editor or editor at large for Merriam-Webster Dictionary, and his name is Peter Sokolowski. And he was a big deal on Twitter in the word world. Now he's moved over to Blue Sky, in the X world. He's over on Blue Sky, the other social kind of intermediate network. And Peter and I go running one morning a year in DC. And I just hammer him with all this questions about the words that are coming around these days. They're always adding words to the dictionary, by the way. And if you follow Merriam-Webster Dictionary on X or any other social media, they always will tell you, we've added this word to the dictionary because it's so common in culture that it needs to be standardized. What a dictionary does is standardize. It needs to be standardized and acknowledged it is now a part of a dictionary of the English language. And that whole process of how we get words that come out of culture to become now standards is a fascinating process to me, and probably my biggest lesson coming out of all those years working with the bee.
That's so interesting. So, do they take words out? Like if they've fallen out of use of the lexicon, do they take words out of the dictionary?
I think they're more likely to say archaic or obsolete. They don't take words out, to my knowledge, but they will put labels on there saying that this is not a word in common, or it's been replaced by a new word. Whereas the old word, and again, some of it comes out of Old English, Middle English, or even like English from 100 years ago. But the words don't disappear, but they will annotate them with some other mark saying, yeah, you're not going to hear this around the backyard this week. So
I could talk about this stuff all day, but I'm going to let you go on that one. Chip Mahaney, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation today, and all of your wisdom around the way we use our words in our culture today.
Dan, I appreciate the invitation. Listen, you're a great friend. You've always been a great friend. You're super interesting. And I'm really glad that you're using this medium, this great podcast medium in which anyone in the world can hear what you're talking about. And you've got great things to say. And I hope that you keep doing it, because you never know where your word's going to land on somebody that day. Somebody needs to hear what you're saying. And your pulpit's important, but your podcast is important too.
I appreciate you saying that, Chip. And you're a great friend, and miss you. And hopefully we get to catch up sometime soon. And if the Buckeyes ever end up playing the Mustangs, I'm not going to root for you, but I will have a little soft spot in my heart.
Well, we're Methodists after all.
There you go. You are a Methodist.
Together. And yes, we're an outside contender. We were in the CFP 2 years ago, and we're a shot to get there again. So maybe we'll see you. And I hope we get to play you in Dallas, not in Columbus in December, because that would be pretty cool.
That would be pretty cool. Yep, absolutely. All right, Chip, thanks for being with us. And thanks to all of you for joining us on another Sermon Prep podcast.